So, well, actually, it's not the first time I speak about this topic, so I apologize if you already heard about it. What I try to do today is to emphasize the part that is usually put into the surface. So that's, I hope, to be something new for the people who've already heard about it. So yeah, I want to speak about monsters. Well, cat-zero spaces, and actually I will speak about cat-zero cube context mostly. So to start with, well, if you know me, my favorite groups, we all have favorite groups, is what's called Burnside groups. So one way to define them is, well, for the free one, you just take a group which is generated by R elements, and you ask that every element raised to the n is the identity. And what is now known for quite a long time is that, well, if R, you have at least two generators, and your exponent is something sufficiently large, I don't want to deal with the exact bounds, then maybe surprisingly, this group is infinite. So although every element has finite order, the group is infinite. So if I want to put some names here that belong this, well, the first group was by non-amenable, and you have all the proof by Grigorchuck. That was for the odd exponents, odd ends, and also Ivanov and Lisenok for the even exponents, and some more names for other proofs. Okay, so this group is infinite, and now what I'd like to understand is what are more properties of this group, in particular in terms of analytic properties. So one first observation, which is due to Etienne, is that, again, for sufficiently large n, this group Rn is not amenable. So his proof used actually testing criterion using spectral radius random walks, but there is a pretty nice easy way to see it. It's just, well, start with the free group, and you can map it onto your favorite hyperbolic group, which is torsion free and with Gaussian property. And now, well, you take the quotient where you killed nth power of all those n's. So on one side, you'll get the free Burnside group, and if you kill the nth power of every element in the group, you get something which is, again, if n is sufficiently large, an infinite group.
That's a game of theory.
Sorry? That's a game of theory. Yeah, that's an improvement of this thing. Yeah. Every time you start actually with a non-visually cyclic hyperbolic group, you can find arbitrary large exponent for which the quotient is infinite.
Is that delta Gromov?
So this was already done by Tarski, but yeah,
Okay.
You have another proof here by delta and Gromov. I heard we should always cite Gromov when we're in the talk because that's always safe. so now this group here, as a quotient of G, has property T. So in particular, since it's infinite, it cannot be amenable, because amenable plus property T means finite. So this one cannot be amenable as well, otherwise the quotient here would be amenable. Okay, so that's one proof. So the second remark, well, it's more than a remark, but there was a long-standing open question by Shalom who asked, well, can this group BRN have property T? And there is a very recent answer by Alja, which said that again, for n larger than big number, the free Burnside group does not have property. So that's a very cute argument. But
He gave a very nice talk on it at the conference in January.
Yeah.
Very nice talk.
yeah, so you heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the argument. So now the natural question here. Well, you're not amenable, but you don't have property T, so can you get the exact opposite of property T? So does this free Burnside group have the aggregate property?
So do you know how many isomorphism types of are generated Burnside groups of exponent n? Uncountable? Because I mean,
So it's even more than that. If you fix the exponent, there are uncountably many Tarski monsters up. So that means that you have a group with a fixed exponent, and every proper subgroup is just cyclic. And there are uncountably many isomorphism types. So yeah, there are a lot of ways. Okay, so, well, the goal of my talk is one attempt to go in that direction. I cannot answer that question, unfortunately, but in the joint work with Vincent Guéradel, we have some nice results about in this direction. So, well, here's the statement. What we can do is we can prove that there exists finitely generated infinite torsion group. So unfortunately, we have no bound on the exponent of the elements. With proper action on the Edger cube complex. And it turns out that, well, having a proper action on a K0 cube complex directly gives you that the group has the aggregate property. So let me put G and G as aggregate. So actually a few remarks. We can say a bit more. So G is actually non-amenable. So this group has property because it acts, has hybrid property because it acts in a K0 group complex, but there is somehow no other obvious reason for which it should have the hybrid property. So it's really non-amenable one. And if you like to throw more properties in the box, you can ask that G is residually finite.
The cube complex is infinite dimensional.
So yeah, that was my next remark. So the cube complex has to be infinite dimensional. There is a very cute result by Sagif, which explains you that if you take a group, finitely generated group acting on a finite dimensional cube complex, then either it's finite or it has an infinite order element. So if you want to be infinite torsion, then you need the action to be on an infinite dimensional space. So yeah, that's a very good remark.
It could still be proper. It could still be locally finite.
So this one will not be locally finite. Actually, you can adapt the argument that gives saying that if you have a group acting on a locally compact Cat-zero cube complex, so maybe you have cube of larger and larger dimensions, but still locally compact, then the same holds. Either you're finite or you have an infinite order element. So that basically is the same argument. So this one will also not be locally finite. You have cubes which are embedded in higher and higher dimensions.
They're not residue finite.
Sorry?
They're not residue finite as well.
Well, the group is already finite, but the space here is not locally compact.
The residually finite torsion group, if it is finitely generated, is fine.
No, it's not a bounded exponent.
Yeah, it's the exponent
Ah,
unbounded.
it's
Yeah, yeah.
unbounded exponent.
Yeah. Our hope at the beginning was to get that free Burnside group has a group property. And of course, we will not get the residual finiteness, but we cannot do that. So instead of having bounded exponent, we have residually finite. Okay, so well, so I'm mostly focused on this result here, but I thought it would be nice also to mention another groups we are able to produce with Vincent using the same kind of strategies. So that another group. So the idea is it's sort of Tarski monster-like group. So there exists a finite degenerated infinite torsion group G says that. So we want this group to be residually finite. So then, if you think the Tarski monster, as I said, is a group where every precursor group is finite. So if you want the group to be residually finite, you cannot expect such a strong property. But you can have just enough group so that it's residually finite and all the rest. Well, you have the finite index of groups and all the rest are finite. Basically, that's the idea. So what we can do is that we can say that every subgroup of G is either locally finite, we cannot get exactly finite, or has finite index. So actually, if I just state these two statements, this was already done by Jakin and Ershoff. And with Vincent, we add another layer on the top. So we cannot quite prove that this group G has the high group property, but still we can prove that G does not have property. So another two groups, well, from my point of view.
high Grigorchuck, they know property or?
Sorry?
In this previous result of high Grigorchuck, they know something about property?
So they know how to produce examples which do have properties.
Yes, yes, this is what I think.
But proving that they don't have property, I don't think this is not.
He's speaking tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
You could ask him,
But not about this.
but not about this.
Yeah.
And their examples are also actually residue P.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Still with property. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's somehow that's one difference because here on our construction we have some two torsions hanging around everywhere. And for instance, that's one reason we have some trouble here. We cannot get just finite, but locally finite. So, but I think that also we get also residue finite. I need to check whether there are residue P or not. Okay, so that's another cool group. So today I try to focus on this one and try to explain what are all the ideas behind and try to keep as many details as possible. Basically, this group, that's sort of the same kind of story, but a bit more dense. Any questions so far? Okay, so. So what I'm going to do is start by introducing a black box, which is the tool you need to produce this example, and then we'll open the black box and see how we prove it. So, if you know me, the black box has to be small constellation theory. Actually, I don't know many ways to produce torsion groups. The only three I had in mind what we yesterday is you have small constellation, you have groups with large efficiency, and you have Grigorchuck groups. And I think basically that the three ways you have to produce torsion groups. So here I'll use small constellation, and so there are several layers, so I will add the layers one after the other. So the first one is a theorem which, well, let's say there is Burma somewhere. That's in Burma group. I think the first group were by Olshansky, Desdon, and Champetier. And it says the following. So you start with G, which is a hyperbolic group, which is not going to be cyclic. And we take G, which is an infinite order element. And basically you want to produce a quotient of G while you kill some powers of your infinite order elements and remains the same class of group, meaning in the class of hyperbolic. So the statement the following is that there exists some integer k so that for every n, the group G bar, which is the quotient of G when you kill the kn power of your element, is hyperbolic and not spiritually charged. So let's just start with this and we'll see how to produce out of that an infinite torsion group. So the strategy is the following. I start, let's say, with a free group, and I'm going to apply this result to kill the sum powers of every element in this group. So you start with G naught, which is, let's say, a free group on 2 elements, and I will list all the elements in the free group. And now I want to produce a sequence of groups so that in the group GK, all the elements G naught to GK have finite order. So, well, here I just take my original group, and the first one, well, I take G1, apply the theorem, and I say, well, G1 would be the quotient of G1 by some powers. And that's a hyperbolic group. Now I go to the second step. Well, maybe here G2 already has finite order. So if I kill an appropriate power, I will not change the group and I don't have to do anything. Or G2 has infinite order, and then I apply the result again, and I kill some powers of G2.
You mean infinite order, you mean infinite exponent?
Yeah, infinite. Yeah, order exponent. I don't know.
It's just an element.
Yeah.
Group element.
So what I do is, every time it's possible, I kill the large power of the next element. So, and sort of easy consequence is that if you now consider the limit of those group you get at the limit, well, it's finitely generated by 2 elements. So, it is a torsion group. Any element dies at some point. And it is infinite. And the reason is that, well, if it was finite, this process should stop at some point. So that's not the case, so that's infinite. And actually, the way I did that, I can even claim that it is non-amenable. Because here in my statement, I have the freedom to choose this integer n, which I chose to be the same at each step here. So my group G infinity will map onto the free Burnside group with exponent n. And if I choose that n is sufficiently large so that this free Burnside group is non-amenable, this one will be non-amenable. Okay, so that's a way to produce an infinite torsion group. So now let's add a layer to this statement to have richer structure on this. So the next layer is due to y's, and basically that's a non-normal subquotient theorem. So we are asking this time that G not only is a hyperbolic group, but it acts geometrically on a Cantor cube complex, let's say called C. And blah 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 blah. So that matter. The conclusion is I want to stay in the same class group. So here there exists a Cantor cube complex. It's a C bar. This group here is hyperbolic and acting geometrically on C bar. So which means that in this construction, at each step, we have an action on a certain category cube complex. So in particular, none of this group GK will have property T. And one consequence is that, well, property T is an open property in the topology of Mark group. So the limit here cannot have property T. If the limit had property T, some group before should have property T as well. So what you get here for free is that G infinity does not have property T. But now what I'm interested in is to have an action of this group here on a cat-zero cube complex. So basically I would like to use those spaces on which I'm acting, but for the moment have no idea what are the relations between them. And this is the sort of, that's the layer we had with Vincent. So not only the group G bar acts on a cat-zero cube complex C bar, but we know how to compare these two cube complexes. So what I mean by that is there exists some map, so a cellular map between the cat-zero cube complex and, well, I don't have that much space, well, let me write it here. So such that F induces isometry from some ball of radius R, I will tell you what is R right after, onto not exactly its image, but somehow I have bigger cubes in the space. In the space C bar, but that's if I restrict to the image, well, let me say this differently. This map is not onto, but if I restrict to the image, I already get an isometry. And here, where R is about, well, I have the element here that I try to kill, and I can look at what is its translation length in my space C. And basically, if I take 1/100 HD1.
So the map F sends cubes to cubes?
Yes, that's a cellular map. It sends cube to cube.
Does it have any sort of equivalence?
So there is a second statement which I'll probably write there at the top, which tells, well, not only you control the geometry, but actually you control also the geometry of some orbits. So let me write it here. I want to keep other black ball. So that's one. That's one. And the second point is the following. So let's take 2 points in the original cube complex and some elements in the quotient group, such that if you look at the distance between f of x and f of y translated by your element G bar, this is less than R, the same R as here. So you're looking somehow at an element which has a small translation length in the quotient. What I claim is that actually there is a pre-image which has the same translation length. So this precise statement is that there exists a pre-image G of pattern in G bar such that the distance between x and y translated by G is exactly the distance between f of x and g of y translated in G bar. And yeah, and this one is G equivariant as well. So what does that mean? Well, maybe I should go back to the construction to see where this is important. So first, what I can add is that now I have some invariant maps like this. So I can produce a space C infinity, which is just the limit of all my cube complexes. And the thing is that, well, just from a combinatorial structure, I'll get a cube complex at the limit. And now being cat zero, that's a property which involves 5 points. That's, you have 5 points inequality for x, y, z, t, blah, blah, blah. Something is true. So when you go to the limit, these 5 points inequality will remain. So the space here that you get is really a cat zero cube complex.
But it's at this point, presumably, you lose the finite dimensionality of.
Yeah. So each time the dimension will increase. We'll see that right after.
But the map F, so it's also not injective.
It's not injected, but locally it is.
Ah, okay.
That is
Okay, if it's
first point.
locally, then you
Locally it's injected.
right, that's the first point.
And so
That's essentially why in the limit we can zero. I mean, control the local.
well, it's more cube complex structure, you're not collapsing stuff in a weird way. Now the main point which is remaining is, well, the group G infinity obviously acts on this limit. That's an abstract sense, but I want the action to be proper. And what could go wrong? Well, at each step, we are killing powers of more and more elements, which means if you think in terms of hyperbola geometry, you have more and more elliptic elements. That means elements of small transition length. So it might happen that if you look, for instance, at the stabilizer of a point, this one starts to increase, and at the limit, you have a point with an infinite stabilizer, something like this. So this is what we want to prevent. So saying that if you have not too many elements that translate a point by a given distance. But this statement here, what does it tell you? Well, if you had some element in the quotient, let's see here, that translated by a small distance, then actually there's a pre-image here that was already translated by a small distance. So we are not increasing the number of elements which translate by a small distance. So that's where the probableness of the action at the limit comes from. And this is where this second point is really crucial. Okay, so yeah. Now the goal is to explain this black box.
Can you repeat why the limit Q complex is simply connected? I mean,
It's globally cat zero.
so you can control what happens for points at distance arbitrarily far. I don't, maybe, yeah, I missed the point. So where, yeah, I kind of understand that you have some kind of local control with the property you described, but you need some global control to check the condition on the global cat zero condition on arbitrary.
I think that more precisely, every time you fix 5 points, then you can lift them isometrically in one of the previous spaces. So that's worth it. category condition.
So because the R over there is growing.
Yeah, at this stage it's always growing. Yeah, so what's happening is that those maps here are one-to-one on larger and larger balls. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Otherwise you're stuck.
Yeah, otherwise you're stuck, yeah, sure.
Anyway, the exponent of the
Sorry?
is infinite.
It's not exactly the reason why this exponent is infinite. Because if you construct, for instance, free Burnside groups, so you don't have the category group complex structure, but you have the same kind of IDs, and your map are one-to-one on larger and larger balls. The theory has somehow to make them grow faster that way. You want to control the category group complex structure. So let's open these black box. So what I want to do is basically explain the first step. So we started with a free group, take a quotient, and see what is the space we
So
get.
it's
what
also
is-
so the black box is the
Yeah, that is
the
theory
white,
here.
yellow.
This is white, yellow, red. Yeah. And basically I will go with white, yellow, red. Yeah, and I will focus on the first step. So the first step of the construction was, you start with a free group and you make a quotient to get the first G. And actually this first step is nothing but wise result about regular small constellation theory. So I will try to go through this step, but more in a rough description of small constellation. Yeah. You cannot cheat where you come from. So, and then we'll see, well, what could go wrong for the second step, actually. And this is where we'll see where we have some issue with the exponent and why we cannot have a bounded exponent. So, small cancellation theory. Okay, so as we said, well, we have this group here, which is acting, well, on its K graph, which is a tree. So far, everything is good. So my proof would be essentially some cartoons. And in this K graph, so I have the first element that I want to neutralize, kill a large part of it. So this element has some axis here on which it acts by translation. And I can also translate the axis by any element of the group, and I'll get the axis of here the conjugate. And if I choose a power which is sufficiently large, well, you get something which is the following. So I can consider what is the diameter of the axis of G intersected with the translate of the axis of G. And I will look at this for all elements in the free group which are not stabilizing this axis. So of course, if you stabilize the axis, this thing would be infinite, but otherwise that's something which would be finite. So in particular, you can make this very small compared to the translation length of your element. So I dropped the K to keep the notation easy. And here, lambda is some parameter which is something super small. So which means if you look at the scale which is given by the transition length of your element, that overlap here is just ridiculously small. That's really the idea. And so this is, if you're familiar with usual small constellation, these potential overlap are exactly the pieces, and that will be the length of the relation. So we're just saying that the length of the pieces are very small compared to the length of the relation. Okay, so when you have that, well, what you do is, yeah, I'll have to erase this.
And the lambda depends on G.
Well, yeah, on G and on the power.
Ah, yeah.
So here, I'm trying to explain this in this very particular case where you take an element and you raise it to a large power. But what you will see is later is that instead of taking G to the n, if you have taken any relation, not necessarily raised to the power, but satisfying this kind of inequality, then all the proof will go through. So you don't necessarily need to go to sufficient large power if you control the overlap between two axes compared to the transition length of the pen. That's what I want to show, which is hidden behind. Okay, so now let's look at, so if we have the group acting on this telegraph, and if I look at the quotient, well, that was G bar, that was G bar, so that the quotient by large power of G, well, this will act obviously of the quotient where you just scale them. And power of P, and what is this? It's just a telegraph of this group G. So in this telegraph, well, so you have big loops corresponding to the relation. So that's in the telegraph of your space. Maybe that's something translation, something like this. And those loops have a very tiny overlap. So what Groves tells you is, well, on this loop, you can attach a disk, which is modeled on the disk in the hyperbolic plane, and of radius, well, let me write it for a moment. So you feel all those relations with a hyperbolic disk. And if you have chosen your exponent n sufficiently large, you can choose this radius rho to be arbitrarily large. So in particular, you can choose it to be very big compared to the hyperbolic constants of the disk that we attached. And now you have to keep in mind, well, we attach those disks on a very small overlap. So I'm just taking a bit, but basically, if you think, well, I test two hyperbolic plane with just one common point, the result is still hyperbolic, and with the same hyperbolicity constant. So if you perturbate a bit this, when you attach two hyperbolic plane disk with a small overlap, this union is still hyperbolic. And one of the miracles of more conservation is that you can somehow really go from local to global, and not only those disks will be sort of delta hyperbolic, but the whole space will be hyperbolic.
So you will not have changed the hyperbolicity constant, or
The hyperbolicity constant will increase a bit, but not that much.
but in the process, infinite process.
In the infinite process, you have a control.
Okay.
That's so. Yeah, here I'm still hiding a lot of things because that's not the part I want to focus on, and that's one of the, as I said, one of the miracles of more constellation, is that what you can get. So you can get here, so space at around x bar, and then this space x bar will be delta bar hyperbolic, and still with hyperbolicity constant, we can manage to make it super small compared to the radius of the cone. And that's something which is very convenient, because if you think about hyperbolic geometry, usually when you want to prove something, you have something which happens at a small scale, about 100 delta, and then from this data you can get something at a large scale. And knowing that this small scale is super small compared to the radius of the disk would be very useful. We'll see that later. So, and the action, well, the group G bar acts on this space. So this is a proper co-compact action. So you get that the group G bar is hyperbolic. That was a wide layer in my statement. Now, let's think about the Cat-Your cube complex structure, because that's what I mean certainly. So this space X, we said it was true. So in particular, that's a Cat-Your cube complex, a very easy one, but that's one Cat-Your cube complex. And I want to get now a Cat-Your cube complex structure for the quotient. So of course here you completely destroy all that Cat-Your cube complex structure. But what the idea, wise idea is, well, but on this space, the structure of wall space, so where you have wall that separates your space in two halves and you have sufficiently many so that you get a nice action of a quotient on the dual Cat-Your cube complex, and then get what you want. So we want to have a wall structure on this space, and then we apply the Sergeev's duality between wall spaces and Cat-Your cube complex. So basically, it's, well, start with the walls from this space X and try to build walls for this new one. So as we said, well, here the walls are just, well, on the hyperplanes, midpoint of edges. So if you look here, well, take the midpoint of an edge. That's not a very good idea for a wall. But what you can do is, well, this is really what Wise is doing. Join this edge to the center of this disk. Okay, that's something I can do here. And maybe I can. So that's not enough to separate the space in two halves. But what you can do is, well, if you look at this edge here, there is an edge on the opposite of your relation in the K graph. So you have another midpoint of an edge here that adjoins the center of the disk and to the center of this disk.
You're assuming n is even?
Yeah, you can take any even.
Okay.
Otherwise, you subdivide your graph, and then you have an even length.
Okay.
That's not. And well, step by step, you're going to produce something which you hope can become a wall on the space X bar. So what we need to check is that these things separate the space in two halves. So what is easy to see is that if you look at the small balls around this set, locally it separates in two halves. And the space X bar is simply connected. So what I want to make sure is that I'm not having potential walls that come back across itself. And here, one way to understand is to use this hyperbolic geometry. Because if you just focus on the red part, well, I'm touching the geodesic, so the red part is just a convex thing. Now, if you look at what's happening in a disk, I have a geodesic, and here, what is the angle? Well, it's something larger than pi. you could just add the opposite. So that means that this segment is just as well. So the thing you get is locally convex. And when I mean locally convex, this thing would be rho locally, let's say delta, be more precise, rho locally delta rho. Quasi-convex, something like this. So if you look at a piece of radius rho, well, either it's contained in the disk or in some of these parts, and that part is, you have to perturb with the delta law quasi-convex. So now we use the fact that this radius was super big compared to this probabilistic constant. And there is a local to global principle which tells you that the whole thing now is quasi-convex. And to a particle rod, it cannot come back and cross itself. And from that, you can deduce that this plays the role of a honest wall on the space X bar. So now we have walls on the space X bar, and there is still a lot of work to show that there are sufficiently many walls so that you can separate all the points and get a proper concapact action on the dual cube complex. So that's not the end of the story. There is still some work, but that's the spirit of the project. Okay, so well, just from there, we can see where the dimension grows in this process. Because we're here, maybe I should zoom here, you have a relation, and I drew one of the walls, so that's one of the walls in my new space. But I have a lot of other walls. If I start with an edge, the edge next to the previous one, I have a wall like this, and a wall like this, and so on. Now, if you're familiar with the Tarski theorem to go from wall spaces to K0 cube complex, you know that the dimension of the resulting cube complex will be the maximal number of hyperplanes or walls that pairwise intersect. And here you get, well, n over 2. So each time you are killing larger and larger powers, you get bigger cubes. Actually, I said n over 2 is not exactly correct. It's half of the length of it. So if G is already very long, you get even more pairwise intersecting walls, so bigger dimension. Okay, so that's what is telling you why this space X can be endowed with a wall structure, and
But they won't intersect anywhere else. A pair of walls that intersect in that disk will intersect only in that disk.
only that is because of quasi-convexity again. Basically, the way we try to describe this Vincent is most of the time, if you look at local picture, you have some sort of a Wysiwyk principle, what you see, what you get. So in a ball, you will only see that. There is no reason that somewhere should go very far away and come back. And actually, there is the same principle if you're in a ball around the point, you know, in the border of a disk. There is this Wysiwyk stuff that nothing wrong can happen. And very good transition. Now I can come to the next part. So we have this space X bar with a wall structure. So a dual K0 cube complex. But I want to compare the K0 cube complexes. The one I started with, which is just here, my K graph, and the dual cube complex I get from here. So what I need to understand is if I pick 2 points which are at distance, I don't know, 10 in X, how many walls are separating these 2 points in X bar? Because the distance in the Cantor cube complex, in the dual Cantor cube complex, is just the number of walls which separates my 2 points. And here comes the second miracle from small constellation. No, I want to keep that. So I had my original graph, and I had this parameter rule, something which is very big. And the secondary cause, as I said, is that you have to have more colors. If I pick a point, let's say here, in my original space X, and look at the ball here of radius, let's say, 4/100 in my original space, and look how it maps here in this space. Basically, this map is a bijection. So that's another miracle of small constellation. So we have rho over 100 bijection.
So M has to be big with respect to rho because
Somehow there are
yeah, they
fixed together. They're
can't.
So basically, so if you want to have a careful understanding of what are the constants, basically you have some universal constant which is given you as a black box, and you start by rescaling your space so that these overlap are very small compared to these universal constants. And then you work only in H2. So what is the perimeter of a disk in H2 is 2 pi hyperbolic sine of rho. So you adjust the rho so that the length of g to the n is this 2 pi hyperbolic sine of rho. And if you increase the exponent n, that will increase the rho accordingly. Basically, that's the idea. So those two are related. The bigger the n is, the bigger you can choose rho. So in particular, that rho here will be, something which is, as I erased in my theorem, something which is related to the transition length of my. And so now if I take 2 points in this ball, well, they are separated by some number of walls in the original space. Well, if I look in the image, I have these 2 points, and I have the same number of walls here. Maybe they start having their own life in some disk and maybe somewhere else. But as locally, I know that this picture is exactly the same as this picture, plus the quasi-convexity of the walls. I know that they will never come back, and there will be no other walls coming from outer space and entering this ball, which are not one that come from those edges. So locally, how many walls separate those 2 points? Exactly the number of walls that were separating their pre-images in the previous space. So that's how we get the local control between the 2 cube complexes. Basically, this is because between those spaces we have a nice local isometric. Okay, so that's sort of finish the sketch of the first part. So let me take a few minutes to explain what could go wrong at the next step. Because what was very convenient here is that, well, all walls here are bounded. So basically, you have your axis G, and it is sort of transverse to every wall. Now, in this dual category cube complex, that will no more be the case. So in particular, if you look now at the step from G1 to G2, you may have some hyperplane in your cube complex. And an axis, well, the good case is, well, imagine you have an axis which is somehow transverse, so that's the axis of G to D. If you look in the quotient, as I did using the Kelly graph, you'll see the relation, and somehow your hyperplane locally is something transverse here. So you can still say, well, let's, comb this hyperplane and match it with someone on the other side and try to do the same kind of strategy. But what could happen, what could go wrong, is if your axis is doing something like this. So what does that mean? I mean, in the quotient, now, you have your element G to the M, and your hyperplane start wrapping around, maybe turning many times around your relation. And then this trick, well, you match it with someone at the opposite, does not work anymore, because you need that very big angle to get local quasi-convexity and then global quasi-convexity for your hyperplane. So that will no more work. So what we are using instead is that, well, there is a way to bound those possible overlap between hyperplanes and relation. The reason is that our hyperplanes are co-compact and there are only finite many orbits. So
Couldn't your G lie in the hyperplane?
it could stabilize the hyperplane.
Yeah.
So what we introduce another parameter. So yeah, if I call that was what? Let's say what delta, and let's say you have delta H, and that would be the soup for all hyperplane. Which are not G invariant of the diameter of the intersection of the hyperplane with axis. So that quantity, I claim that quantity is finite. If you remove the one that leaves the hyperplane invariant. And now up to raising your element n to very large power, you can make this again very small compared to the transition length of the element. If you have this, well, what does it mean? It means the bad situation somehow is almost ruled out, because you cannot have a hyperplane that does this unless it is invariant under this element. So basically you have planes maybe do that, but something very, very small. So for those who have a very small, intersection with the relation, we do the same as previously. You comb that and you match them with the one in front, and everything works well. And for those which have some others which are just invariant, well, you just comb them completely and you leave them alone. And now if you do that, everything explained works basically the same way. So you get again a wall structure on your new space X bar and a dual cube complex with the same control between the geometry of the original cube complex and the dual cube complex. And well, to finish, I'd like to make a remark again. So in this statement, first statement, small concession statement of growth, I said, well, if you raise G to sufficiently large power, then everything works fine. So the idea is really that by raising G to sufficiently large power, you can make the length much bigger to those two constants. But now if you have a relation and you know in advance that it's much bigger to those two constants, then all the process work. You don't need to pass it through power. And that's something which is very crucial, for instance, to produce this Tarski-like monster, as I explained at the beginning. So somehow here there is a little difference between Y's term and what we have done, is that in Y's term, one of the statements is up to passing to a finite index subgroup, everything works fine. Here somehow we identify what is the exact condition we need so that it works fine. So I think I'll stop here.
Thanks a lot. Questions? Do you have a preprint of this?
It's almost over. Yeah, I hope it will be done soon. The thing is that we try to add more and more and more and more, but we should decide it. No, let's go with this. That's enough.
What about the property that every subgroup is locally finite or has finite index?
So I can tell you what is the black box that we need here, and again, this black box comes from small constellation theory. So basically, you start with the group G, which is hyperbolic, again, non-virtually cyclic, and to be safe, there is no non-trivial finite normal subgroup. There's always the joke with the finite normal subgroups, so let's rule them out. And now you have a certain subgroup in G, so non-virtually subgroup. And you want to produce a quotient where now this subgroup will generate the whole quotient. So that's a finite, well, no, you don't need finite generated. So you fix H1, H2, let me say some good elements in H. Basically two set generate a free group. And you consider the quotient of G, which is given by something like this. So this is generated by finite set here. So you write every generator as some weird word in your two elements H1, H2. So if you just look at this quotient now, the image of H in G bar would be the whole group. And you can produce those elements, use those words so that the set of relation will satisfy the small constellation assumption. So now once you have this, how you get the Tarski monster? Basically you say, well, you list all pairs of elements in the free group, and to each pair you say, well, do this one generate a finite group? If they do, you do nothing. If not, you can prove that they will generate a non-virtually cyclic group. If you do that in the right order, basically. And then you make sure that in the quotient, these two elements will generate the whole group. So that at the limit, when you pick any two elements, either they will generate a finite group or the whole group. Now you can refine to get residue finite and generate only finite index subgroup or being locally finite, that kind of thing, but basically that is a strategy. And well, that now a good point again to emphasize something is that if you look at those relations, if you rate them, so the relation is something like one. So if you rate that relation to a large power, that will no more do the job. So here, if you wanted to really have Tarski relation, you cannot pass to power. This is really where we need to control this possible overlap between hyperplanes and the relation, so that we make sure that we don't need to pass to power.
Other questions? So if not, we thank the speaker. Rémi again.
Ah,